There's a fire on the lot, and my game has chosen this moment to freeze. I can't click on anything, I can move the camera, but I can't click on anything, so I am literally going to have to sit here and watch one of my Sims burn to death, which is the end of this challenge if one of the Sims dies. And I specifically installed a sprinkler system to prevent this. It's coming up with extinguish, and when I select it, nothing's happening. And Andy's naked, and everyone's just standing around watching as Susan burns to death. Great. This isn't the kind of chaos I wanted for my Asylum challenge. Hi there, welcome to my channel and welcome to part 3 of the Asylum challenge. In the first part we built the asylum, and in the second part I created all the inmates, and in this part I'm going to start actually properly playing the game. So the way it works is I have to take control of just one of the Sims, and I can't control the other 7 Sims. I need to just keep control of that one Sim until they have completed their aspiration. So there's a number of ways that I could have done this. But what it came down to was, I chose to do Ailish first, simply because Ailish's aspiration is neighbourhood confidant, and in order to do that, they need to be able to interact with other Sims. And because the Sims are locked into the asylum and cannot leave the lot, the only way that Ailish can interact with other Sims is if they interact with other Sims that are in the house. So if I waited to play Ailish until other Sims had already completed their aspirations and left, it would be harder for me to get them to complete their aspiration. So we're starting out with Ailish's story, and I'm just going to give you a quick reminder. Ailish White is a young adult. They are erratic, hot-headed and nosy, and they have the aspiration of neighbourhood confidant, as I said. So for that, they are going to need to get to know all the other Sims, use their nosy skills to find out as much as they can, and then start offering advice. And the key is they have to offer that advice successfully, which may or may not go down well because Ailish being erratic and hot-headed is going to hinder that a little bit. So today we're going to be working on that, and certainly this episode and probably the next couple of episodes will be following Ailish's story until it's complete, at which point Ailish will leave the asylum and we'll be left with the other 7 Sims, and I will take over another one. So with that said, let's start Ailish's story. Ailish's story begins very tense, because Susan set herself on fire and then did absolutely nothing to put herself out. Andy, who is actually one of Susan's closest friends, stood completely naked and watched her burn. Thankfully Glenn was at least able to finally fix the situation. And after that, after Glenn had put the fire out, the sprinkler system finally engaged. Everyone else ran out of the asylum and left Ailish on their own to be terrified of what had just happened. But not so terrified that Ailish didn't feel they could carry on cooking themselves some food. And being the thoughtful and considerate person that they are, Ailish made enough food for themselves. As one of the steps of Ailish's aspiration was to become good friends with 5 Sims, they decided to make a head start on that by getting to know one of their fellow inmates a little better. They decided that since Susan appeared to have cleaned herself up after setting herself on fire, maybe chatting to Susan was a good place to start. Susan didn't exactly have a very welcoming expression on her face as Ailish approached, but Ailish remained optimistic, because despite Ailish's failings, they were quite a charming person, and could be really quite endearing and charismatic to other people, especially when first meeting them. Ailish attempted to make conversation with Susan, and Susan acted weird, which, to be fair, is not exactly unusual for Susan. However, Ailish persevered. Ailish tried to explain their concerns and their problems to Susan, but, Susan being the person that she is, she decided to be a bitch about it. Ailish decided to try a bit of humour and thought they might try telling Susan a funny story to see if that helped their friendship along at all. Ailish put their all into telling a hilarious story, one of the funniest ones that they knew. But Susan, being the bitch that she is, didn't get the joke. In fact, Susan just continued to be incredibly unpleasant. However, Ailish did manage to discover a secret about Susan. Susan is a serial decliner. Every day it feels like my phone won't stop ringing with text message after text message from Sims I know wanting to hang out. Somehow there's always new places to check out, in town, out of town, everywhere. I'd bet if there was another planet that had a cool hangout spot, they'd throw me in a rocket and blast me off right now if they could. But I'm just tired. Sometimes it's been a long day and I just want to chill, work on myself, or take a load off. I promise I care about my friends and minor acquaintances, but I've got better things to do 90% of the time. No, you don't, Susan. No, you don't. You're a liar and you do not have better things to do. And that's exactly what Ailish told her. And unfortunately, this caused Susan and Ailish to start to dislike each other. And the conversation became an offensive one. Ailish's first attempt at making friends in the asylum wasn't going too well. So Ailish decided to spy on Susan. Getting a pair of binoculars and moving to a reasonable distance away, they began to spy. The next morning was Neighbourhood Brawl Day. Ailish loves Neighbourhood Brawl Day because Ailish is hot-headed, and as a hot-headed sim, they couldn't wait to participate. However, Ailish decided to start their day by working on their charisma skill. Part of their aspiration was that they would have to get their charisma skill up to level 7. For some reason that only Susan could really explain to us, Susan stood in Ailish's way in front of the mirror with that sour look on her face the entire time. After a little bit of practicing their charisma skill, Ailish went after Elgers. It was Neighbourhood Brawl Day after all, and the point of Neighbourhood Brawl Day is to have brawls with everyone, and Elgers, being the bullying piece of that he is, he seemed like a good place to start. A good place to progress to was of course Susan, because at this point Ailish really didn't like Susan. After successfully defeating Elgers and Susan in a fight, Ailish was feeling quite confident. However, they hadn't quite done enough to achieve their goals for Neighbourhood Brawl Day, so they decided to have a practice, sparring, before continuing on and finding their next opponent. After sparring, Ailish decided to get in a bit of practice, spying on Stuart very subtly, standing in a position where Stuart definitely wouldn't be able to see them with their binoculars. When Ailish finally made it downstairs, they discovered that Michelle had very kindly made breakfast for them. Ailish did intend to eat their breakfast at the dining table, but when they realised that Susan was sitting there alone, which is not really surprising, they decided to head back into the kitchen and get to know Andy a little better. He seemed like another person who was also in the asylum. And after a couple more neighbourhood-friendly brawls, Ailish finally checked off their goal for the day. Ailish decided that they'd had enough of Susan and confronted her about the secret they knew about her. And for some odd reason, it actually made Susan a little more agreeable and a little more friendly towards Ailish. After spending a little more time practicing their charisma skills in front of a mirror, Ailish finally reached level 2 of the charisma skill, taking them one step closer to completing their aspiration. In their bid to make 5 good friends to achieve that part of their aspiration, Ailish decided it might be an idea to try befriending Andy. He always seemed so gloomy. Perhaps trying to cheer him up might help. But apparently it didn't, because apparently Andy loves being miserable. Ailish decided to persist and tried to ask Andy about his Star Wars figures or some of his other interests, but honestly the conversation was just painful. Absolutely torturous. So much so that it began to make Ailish think maybe they were romantically reserved, because that's what talking to Andy does to a person. It makes you question if you ever want to have any sort of meaningful relationship with any other human being in any capacity ever again. Cringy Carol seemed like someone else that Ailish might be able to befriend. Ailish found Carol asleep at the dining table because, she's lazy, and lollygagging around instead of actually doing anything useful is what Carol specialises in. Ailish tried to gently rouse Carol from her sleep, and she woke up and began hissing like a cat and sniffing her own armpits. Ailish tried to amuse Carol with one of their funny stories, but Carol, being cringy, didn't get it, and instead sat there and just got angry. When lazy, cringy Carol literally fell asleep again mid-conversation this time, Ailish turned their attention back to Andy, who seemed to be in one of his rare, slightly better moods. Notice that I didn't say good mood, I just said slightly better. But just like any time it appears that Andy might be improving slightly, he very quickly went back on it and went back to being a miserable bastard. Making friends was hard and it was tiring work, and at the end of the day, Ailish still found that the most entertaining person in the asylum was of course themselves. No one else could tell the story quite like they could, no one else was quite as charming and interesting as they were, and so sometimes when it all got a bit much for them, they just went onto the roof and, spoke to themselves.
Buffoony.
Ailish found that one of their few possible friends in the asylum was Stuart Orange. Ailish wondered to themselves if Stuart was called Stuart Orange because of his orange face, but decided it probably wasn't good to ask that when looking to build a friendship with him. After managing to pry a secret out of Stuart, however, Ailish felt a little bit gleeful, a little bit more information that they could keep up their sleeve to perhaps use as blackmail at some point in the future. After telling Stuart some more of their weird and wonderful stories, Ailish shortly found something quite incredible. They had managed to make a good friend out of Stuart, 1 out of 5 good friends, and a bit of progress on their aspiration. And with that little bit of progress, we'll end our story here for today. Tune in next time when we continue Ailish's story, as Ailish tries to find 4 more Sims in the asylum to become good friends with, and continues trying to raise their charisma skill to level 7. So far they haven't had much luck trying to offer advice to anyone, but hopefully that will improve once they have some more good friends in the asylum. Tune in next time to find out. Thanks for watching. Oh Glenn, don't act like you haven't seen it before.